And I'd like to introduce Roy Hunt to introduce our speaker today. Thank you.
I wanted to start out by telling you how this course came to be. I had intended to do this the first session of the course, but of course I was not here for the first two sessions. But it really is the result of an epiphany I had while lying in a hospital bed in Shands several months or more than a year ago. And this epiphany was prompted by the announcement in the Gainesville Sun that the 4,000-acre Lee property located along the Parker Road near the town of Tioga was up for development. I had known the Lee family for many years. They were in Jacksonville. I occasionally saw them at parties here, but they had never expressed any interest in developing. They simply retained it in agricultural use, in part for property taxes. But the next generation has decided to do something with it, and the property has been in that family. I think it's about 75 years. I think it was acquired by Fran's grandfather right after World War II. In any event, it's been in the family a long time, and that's a big chunk of property. It's twice the size of Hale Plantation and I think town of Tioga. So still up in the air as to how it's going to be developed. But one of the approaches suggested was the new urbanist approach, which you find at Hale Plantation and at town of Tioga. So that, as I say, got me thinking about the new urbanism in Alachua County, since we had both Hale Plantation and town of Tioga, and I think both very successful. And I had never thought about Alachua County as a leader nationally or even internationally in the whole notion of new urbanism until that Lee announcement and the epiphany I had at Shands. And early on, I was interested in new urbanism, and Andre Stuani usually credited with starting it. And I know Jay Reeves talked to you last week about Andres being influenced by the Duck Pond area here in Gainesville. But his first really well-known project was Seaside on State Highway 30A, I believe, in the Panhandle. And I went there a number of times from the very beginning to see how it developed. And then later he did Rosemary Beach, a little further east, which I think was equally interesting, very different from Seaside. But the new urbanism really began in Florida with Andre Stuani. I later went to see a failed shopping center called Mashpee Commons on the Cape, which he had turned into a new town, which was brilliant. I think it's been a brilliant success in terms of reuse of abandoned shopping centers. So that's how this course came to be. And I guess that you have to be old and have a certain maturation in order for all of these things to connect up. So here we are. And today we're on the third session in which Mary Laurie is going to talk about Hale Plantation, both in terms of its genesis as an actual plantation, beginning in the late 1850s, developed by families which are still in the community. And then she's going to talk about the development called Hale Plantation, which she has followed over the years. And I suspect many of you know Murray, but if you don't, Murray has been a quiet but forceful member of the preservation community for, I don't want to embarrass you, but it's been 50 years, almost 50 years. When I incorporated the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation in 1978, Murray quickly agreed to be the editor of the newsletter to let the world know that we existed, and others were welcome to join. Subsequently, she moved to Gainesville as part of the graduate school and was there advising graduate students on their theses until her retirement. But if you were to look at the list of National Register properties in Alachua County, you would see her fingerprint on almost every one. And in the 1970s, when Marshall Kreiser became president of the university and authorized us to seek to make the core campus, the historic campus, a National Register Historic District, Murray was the one who wrote the nomination. And that has had an enormous impact because then Marshall authorized us to enter into a programmatic memorandum of agreement between the university and the Division of Historical Resources, which requires that the division be able to review and comment on any changes in historic buildings or new construction in buildings within the boundaries of the campus National Historic District. Those of you who were here early enough remember when GPA was built. And so much of this was a reaction against GPA and the incompatibility of that structure in terms of the historic campus. And at one point, the administration was seeking to demolish every historic building on campus. They actually put together a pamphlet for the legislature called The Space Story at the University of Florida. It's digitized now. And the centerfold is an aerial view. It looks like a tic-tac-toe board with X's for the buildings to be destroyed, which include Flint, Floyd, Peabody, Anderson, University Auditorium, everything. So we've come a long way, and in part, that was possible because of Murray's work on the campus. She's also done nominations for most of the small communities around the county. I think the first one was probably Melrose, and that's a real challenge because Melrose is actually in 3 different counties and unincorporated. Beyond that, she has established a reputation at a higher level in terms of national historic landmarks. And she wrote the nomination for the Rawlings property, the Rawlings home and farm. And I was in the room in Washington when Murray very effectively presented that nomination to the National Historic Landmarks Committee, where it was unanimously adopted and has been a National Historic Landmark for now, 15 years, 20 years. She also wrote the initial draft, the nomination of Dudley Farm, and that was a longer project and was finally approved just 2 years ago. And so we have now in Alachua County 2 of the 47 National Historic Landmarks in Florida. And part of that credit goes to Murray. So I've probably said enough about her, and it's time for me to let her tell us about Hale Plantation and Hale Historic Homestead.
Thank you, Roy. I've got one over here. Thank you, Roy. I really couldn't have done this without Roy's help. He kind of pushed me along. I didn't know what I was doing. Let's see, there we go. I'm going to talk about 2 different parts of Alachua County history. The historic Hale Homestead and the new urbanism, Hale Plantation. I am really a novice to the concept of new urbanism, but as Roy said, I've taken an active role in historic preservation for 40 years in Alachua County and other parts of Florida. In 1983, I moved to Gainesville to work on a master's degree in history and architecture at UF. Within a year, I became involved with preparing a nomination of the Hale homestead built in the 1850s to the National Register of Historic Places. This photo of me in front steps of the Hale home in 1984, when I began the project, was just taken to show the scale of the structure. Still owned by members of the Hale family, the large house had been closed and its windows and doors boarded up for decades. The two-story house had been closed. The two-story residence was in very poor shape, yet its future showed promise. The National Register nomination was the first step in restoring the home and preserving its surrounding 40-acre site. You'll have to excuse me for having to read this, but that's what historians do. We write and then we read it to people who are interested in the topic. So bear with me if I lose my place. Whenever I begin a project, I ask myself, why was this building built here? And why is it still standing more than a century later? Answers. In the mid-1800s, Alachua County experienced something of a land boom. And after Florida achieved statehood in 1845, and the county seat of Gainesville began to expand. The word was out that the enterprising Mr. Yulee, our first congressman, was building a railroad from the new state's Atlantic shore to the Gulf of Mexico, and land was still reasonably priced. Some savvy planters from the interior of South Carolina, the Hales, Chestnuts, Stringfellows, Mathesons, and others, moved to Florida to establish cotton plantations in Alachua County in the mid-19th century. Thomas and Serena Hale, both from prominent and wealthy Camden, South Carolina families, purchased 1,700 acres of prime real estate for about $1 an acre from the land agent for the Arredondo grant. The wooded property was situated about 8 miles west of Gainesville near Lake Kanapaha. This Timucuan Indian word translates to a place of small thatched houses. The Hales named their place Kanapaha. And like the earlier indigenous people, their house was built of available materials, lumber from the hardwood trees cut down to clear land for farming, and foundations fashioned from native limestone. Some of the 53 enslaved people from the Hale, South Carolina plantation who traveled overland to Florida by wagon with their household goods, provisions, and tools were skilled carpenters and cabinet makers, as well as agricultural workers. They built the house. Completed in 1856 using braced frame construction, the house stands as a testament to the skill and expertise of these enslaved builders and craftsmen. The pioneer landowners from Camden, South Carolina were a close community, and it was not uncommon for them to share the talents of their workers. Henry Gaines, a stonemason on the Stringfellow plantation near Kanapaha, fashioned the solid limestone foundations for interior fireplaces and chimneys for the Hale home. And you can see the foundations that were so important to this building project. By the 1980s, the Hale house with its rusty tin roof was about all that remained of the way of life that existed for Thomas and Serena Hale and their 14 children in the years before the Civil War. and continuing for years afterwards, until the house no longer served the needs of the family. One of the chimneys had collapsed, and water damage was a major threat. Thousands of trees had grown up on the farm fields that were no longer cultivated. But the fertile land the Hales purchased had proved to be a good investment, as south boundary of the Hale place aligned with Yulee's new Florida Railroad. The cleared land was planted principally in rice and Sea Island cotton, which brought a good price. The Hale family members were fortunate they weren't alone in the wilderness. Several other members of the family, including Thomas Hale's mother, Amelia, and 3 of his brothers, also purchased large parcels in Alachua County. The outbreak of the Civil War in 1861 put a halt to the Hale family's comfortable lifestyle and prospects. Thomas Hale and his oldest son went off to serve with the Confederate forces, and Serena and their other children carried on, as did so many families in both North and South. Mrs. Hale's diaries reveal the home front struggles and the aftermath of the war, as well as years of recovery. Whereas Sea Island cotton flourished in antebellum years, seasons of rainy weather and an infestation of caterpillars diminished the agricultural production on the Hale farmstead in the post-war years. This photo, taken in 1903 by a granddaughter of Thomas and Serena Hale, shows the rear of the house. By this time and for following decades, the house served as a social center for the Hales and their friends, but they didn't live here. A few of their formerly enslaved workers and their families, like those on the left in the photograph, stayed close to the family for years. Others moved to nearby towns and cities and established their own farms. As the Hale children grew up, left home, and settled in other parts of Florida, farming was gradually abandoned. Although the homestead was no longer the center of family living, much of the original acreage remained in the Hale family for generations, where it became a favorite place where groups of men were invited to hunt game in the adjacent woods. And the spacious rooms of the house became the site of parties for the family and their friends. I think this photo was probably taken on the same day in front of the house. It shows the original wood shingle roof and the 6 square columns placed on the front porch floor, in front of the porch floor, a common feature of homes in Camden, South Carolina. The small building in the rear to the far right is the kitchen, which burned down in the 1920s. When I first entered the house, it was dark and empty of all furnishings. I could barely see the pencil marks on the white plastered walls, which later proved to be rich in the history of the house, the famous talking walls. This photo was taken sometime during the 5-year restoration that took place under the supervision of preservation architect J. Reeves, following the successful listing of the Hale homestead on the National Register in 1986. Karen Kirkman, the director of the historic Hale Homestead Complex, continues to research the people who lived and worked at Kanapaha Plantation. And I understand she will be presenting a program at ILR later in the year. So you'll learn more about the Kanapaha Plantation when Karen comes. Meanwhile, In the early 1980s, a parallel Hale plantation was being built a short distance west of the old Hale homestead, and signs like this began to pop up. You have heard from Clary Larkin and Jay Reeves about new urbanism. Hale Plantation was recognized as one of the most successful new urbanism land development projects in the country by the architectural planner Andres Duani. You saw his video tour of Seaside as part of Clary Larkin's presentation. In 2001, Robert Kramer, president of the Hale Plantation in Gainesville, one of the principal architects and planners, spoke at a meeting of new urbanists in Atlanta about more than 20 years of building he and his partners had been working on in Alachua County. Rather than the conventional suburban housing development of the times as dictated by Alachua County land use regulations, Kramer's team imagined a more traditional town or urban village plan to be built over time, a stable community, one that would become a model for future development. So by 2001, it had evolved with its own sense of place, a mix of neighborhoods and public spaces enriched by its natural environment. This image is from one of the first brochures. The name Hale Plantation came about when the partners purchased 1,100 acres from the Hale family that had been part of the original 1,700 acres acquired by Thomas and Serena Hale more than a century earlier. Mr. Kramer commented on the very compact three-owner title history for the land transfer, from a Spanish colonial deed to an early statehood agricultural complex to a 20th century suburban land development partnership. The respect for conserving and restoring the original house was also part of the plan, as he noted their role in helping establish a land trust to help preserve the historic Hale family home. The acreage purchased by Kramer and his partners in the late 1970s was absolutely beautiful site, he remarked in his talk. Mostly hardwood forest with some open pasture. Early brochures declared their objective: to build a community on a human scale where people could live, work, shop, worship, attend school, and enjoy outdoor recreation linked by walkable distances, all within a high-quality man-made setting, while maintaining and preserving the natural beauty of the land. The partners built about 150 homes a year and plan to establish buildings for retail and civic purposes within the village center in the middle, rather than at the edge of the development. This was destined to become the civic and business heart of Hale Plantation. A carefully crafted plan helped to define the new urbanism aspect of Hale Plantation as neo-traditional. The scale and design of the buildings and streetscapes expressed the mixed-use aspect of a walkable town center surrounded by a variety of adjacent home sites with a system of pedestrian passageways. There is a remarkable contrast between the size and scale of the homes built over time. Each neighborhood is designated by individual signage. About 420 acres were set aside for single-family home sites, while townhouses and garden apartments were clustered at the town center. Another 220 acres became extensive parklands, open space for recreation, buffers, and conservation areas. To spare you a parade of homes, I picked this larger house because it reminds me of the late 19th century homes in the Duck Pond neighborhoods that have been preserved and adapted to multifamily living. Mr. Kramer pointed out there were lots of porches and various floor plans and elevations, and that they were very simple buildings with simple detailing. Some allude to New England and Nantucket inspired vernacular styles that blend in with traditional old Florida influences. Many of the homes are set close together with garages and rear alleyways and front porches close to the street, as in places like St. Augustine. Robert Kramer and his partner, Matthew Caskell, approved and handled the first architectural review process, which has evolved over the years. Mr. Kramer saved many of the early marketing materials as well as architectural and planning documents. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2011, so I didn't have the privilege of meeting him or talking to him. But his presentations at New Urbanism events have been very helpful as I compile this talk. However, I was able to talk of one of the most important local individuals brought into the project, Attorney David Coffey, a former mayor of Gainesville. With David's familiarity with local land use laws and Florida growth management regulations, he proved to be a knowledgeable and effective asset. He told me that Mr. Kramer and his team were influenced by local traditional architecture, such as Gainesville's Duck Pond neighborhood with its mix of housing styles and tree-shaded sidewalks leading to downtown offices and civic buildings. They commissioned a visual preference survey before they presented their plans to the county. What pleased people who responded to the survey became part of the vision for the new community. Historic old streetscapes near downtown ranked more highly than clusters of tall apartments surrounded by unshaded parking lots or 4 or 5 lane traffic corridors. See what happens with this. David Coffey sent me some slides Mr. Kramer had shared at a session at the Seaside Institute. You can't beat this slide, springtime in Gainesville and Alachua County as a setting for a new real estate opportunity. I asked David if the Hale family involved in the land purchase had any reservations about the use of their name for the new development. At first, he said they were a bit reserved about it, but they trusted the partners to respect their family traditions, and it seemed they were pleased as the Hale plantation evolved. So these were the topics that he discussed at the Seaside Institute, which is something held on an annual basis for people who are interested in learning about new urbanism. The overall property is about 3 miles across and 2.5 miles to the south. The Hale Village Center is built to access the intersection of 2 major roads, which eventually became major connector roads. Other services were already in place before the Hale Plantation project started, such as public and private schools in the area, county parks and retail space, and the major county roads connected the new town within itself to nearby towns and I-75 and to UF and the city of Gainesville. Attractive signage like this one that designated the Hale Village Center with its shops and offices indicates that the town center was to be designed and landscaped as carefully as the residential and recreational areas that were the first to be built. Retail requires density and customers to become successful. So building and selling homes was the first part of the marketing plan. Where did the ideas and inspiration for the evolving project come from? It wasn't imported from Miami or New York or Chicago. Actually, not too far away. David remembers joining Mr. Kramer frequently as they strolled around St. Augustine, absorbing the intimate scale of the early form of urbanism with a variety of homes, hotels, churches, small shops, parks and fountains, civic buildings, and all sorts of other subtle elements that create the quality of life that we still appreciate. These impressions fit in with the plans for the organic growth that was being created at Hale Plantation. When you don't have waterfront property, you have to work a little harder to make it appeal to people. This is in the middle of what we call the boonies, the woods. So now we call it a forest. This comparison of the street plan of St. Augustine on the right, which was ordered for all Spanish colonial towns centuries earlier, with the proposed town center of Hale Plantation on the left, impressed me as an example of the painstaking planning that took place as the infrastructure was being built and placement of the first homes and neighborhoods was mapped out. The golf courses, horse pastures, and community gardens were placed in natural floodplains using reclaimed water as an environmentally sensitive way for irrigation in cooperation with Gainesville's water treatment facilities in the area. The land for the town center was set aside for the focal hub of Hale Plantation, not an added strip of commercial sites left to chance and inserted on the outskirts of the development. The Hale Plantation archives are rich in details of the planning process, including these sketches of a compact neighborhood design. Some larger homes were set on larger parcels of land, but most of the homes were set close together with sidewalks that contribute to the walkable corridors throughout Hale Plantation. This before and after aerial view of the about 50-acre village center is focused on the creation of business, civic, and retail space. The most vital aspect of planning Hale Plantation from the start was building the village center as part of the public realm, not gated or isolated. So you can see how they planned from the ground up to create this very intricate landscape and how many buildings are tucked into that downtown space. The Hale Village Center became a gathering place for special events and seasonal celebrations. People came from all over the area to dine at trendy restaurants and shops and specialty stores, which contributed to the quality of life of those who had moved into the residential spaces. That's basically the corridor of the sidewalks and the streets for the village center. I want you to note the free-range children out in the village center. The schoolhouse road that winds through the neighborhood leads to Childs Elementary School, and distinctive signs designate different clusters of homes, whereas the streets themselves are numbered to coordinate with the county's grid system. The interconnected system of paved streets and sidewalks takes advantage of the natural canopy formed by the forest and the natural landscaping that has been introduced. Homeowners associations sprang up in the neighborhood, evolved, and families moved in. Some face golf courses, some have small neighborhood parks and playgrounds. Some of these residential clusters are named for people and places associated with the 19th century. Thomas Evan Hale Preserve, Bennett's Garden, Matheson Woods, Amelia Garden, for example. Business owners formed a merchants association as retail and professional workplaces began to fill. Some apartments were built to attract those who want to live where all the activity is, with second floor balconies overlooking the busy scene, adding living space to the stores and offices on the ground floor. A 2007 article in the Gainesville Sun quoted several residents who live near their businesses in the town center and like walking to work, saving gas, and keeping fit at the same time. The neo-traditional community cohesiveness and walkability is a key new urbanism facet of their modern lifestyle. In his talk to the Seaside Institute, Robert Kramer showed slides of a busy realty office, doctor and dentist office, a dog grooming shop, a town hall, a lawyer's office. One slide was of his own home and garden, as well as the garage apartment his daughter lived in while she was in college. The new urbanism concept allowed for a wide variety of buildings, many with architectural detailing that refers to Spanish and British colonial structures in St. Augustine. David Coffey, who prepared and submitted the development of regional impact and planned unit development documents required by Alachua County's comprehensive plan, and the proposed changes needed for the creation of the 50-acre town center, said that Robert Kramer's solid reputation as a town planner and builder earned the respect of the Alachua County planning staff with his honesty and credibility. Even when the plans they submitted did not meet the conventional county zoning codes, they eventually met with approval by the local governments. Roy Hunt suggested I get in touch with Peg and Ron Owens, now residents of Oak Hammock, who built a home in Hale Plantation in 2003. They had resided in the 1950s in Celebration, another well-known new urbanism development built by Disney south of Orlando. They were both very involved in making it an outstanding community in which to live, but they became disillusioned when Disney, in need of funds, sold the community. When I talked to Peg, her enthusiasm for Hale Plantation and the way it has evolved is thoughtfully, she admired the thoughtful planning with respect for the land and those who live and work there. Hale Plantation has grown to fulfill its early promise, a town within itself. The new urbanism planning concept applied most strongly to the mixed-use cluster of goods and services in the village center that allows people to take care of their daily needs with a system of walkable streets. That's another new urbanism keynote concept. The popular Saturday farmers market welcomes the larger community. It was local farmers who asked for this, and it still brings life to the village center on a year-round basis. Hale Plantation has the amenities that people relish: shaded sidewalks, landscaping compatible with the native forest, a variety of choices, large and small. The town center may not have a historic courthouse or a neo-Gothic church, but by the late 20th and early 21st century, Hale Plantation had created its own brand of urbanism as it has grown and flourished. I think this pithy saying that Jay included in his talk last week also works for Hale Plantation. Build it good and they will come. Build it right and they will stay. And don't cut down all the trees. This is, when I drove around recently on a weekend, beautiful weekend, I was impressed with how many people have individually and groups of people were walking just randomly on the shaded sidewalks. I want to go back to what I started out with. At the same time, the historic Hale homestead, Kanapaha, had been given a second chance. Almost lost to rough weather and vandalism, all but deserted and abandoned as a farm and family home, it is now a thriving historic site and museum on Archer Road. Many of the original furnishings have been retained and returned to the spacious rooms, and festive events like the holiday open house welcome visitors once more. I love this picture, the view of the broad front porch of the restored homestead. It shows the practicality and elegance of the 6 columns that brace the porch roof and turned it into an important social space that is as appreciated today as it was on a hot summer day in 1856. Last slide. I will close with the most recent project, the reconstruction of the original kitchen. After much research and planning, it burned down a century ago, as many kitchens were prone to do then. Open for guided tours on Saturday and Sunday, the Hale homestead and its surroundings, 40 acres, will tell the story of the Hale family and the enslaved laborers who worked at Kanapaha Plantation and their families well into our future.
Is that it? Thank you.
Thank you. How many of you lived in Hale Plantation? I know some of you did. You could probably add, because I'm relying on Mr. Kramer's slides, which go back to 2001, and his talks to new urbanism groups. So I don't know what it's like now, except that very fortunately, Peg gave me an update.
Well, I remember vividly my first visit there. I learned about it in the early 60s. And of course, there was a gate and a lock on it. But I met J.D. Henry, who was part of the family, and J.D. had a key to the gate. So a few of my friends and I asked him if he would take us out there. So he picked a Sunday morning, and we had Bloody Marys on the veranda. Another special occasion was, I guess it was the first time that the Florida Trust of Historic Preservation had its annual meeting in Gainesville. And Evans Hale, who's a direct descendant of the founder, and a friend from New York, had 2 grand pianos on the grounds on the backside of the house that you showed. And they played together Rhapsody in Blue. It was a magical occasion. So I've had a lot of wonderful experiences there, but I wonder how many of you've seen the movie Gal Youngin. well, very few, and I think it would be good for us to arrange a showing of that. It's filmed there, and it's based on a Marjorie Canaan Rawlings short story, Gal Young'un. Victor Nunez was the director, and it's really it's a cult film, but I think it would be really interesting to almost everyone here. It's a good movie to begin with, but the connection is also of interest. And so, Julianne, maybe we could set a time for ILR to show that film.
Sure.
It's
I wrote it down.
it was also important in the sense that the Hale family was given some small payment, I can't remember how much, for use of the house for filming it. And that's how they replaced the missing right-hand column as you're looking at the front of the house. The money from the film let them do some minimal restoration. I'm sure there'll be comments or questions.
Start back there.
I must say that while I was doing research on the National Register nomination, Evans Hale and his mother were very, very helpful and shared family documents and stories too.
Good morning, Ann Webster is my name. I have a two-part question.
Mhm.
One is, does anyone know what the current percentage of African-American residents of Hale Plantation is? And number two, has there been any specific effort, either at the beginning of the development or since, to market properties to people of color?
Answer that. Anyone have any idea, Peg?
We have had Black families in Hale. I mean, they're not, certainly not anywhere near the number of, downtown or anything like that, but we have had.
Just south of Hale, and they had their own community.
What?
Well, just south of Hale, they have a community on the way to, what was that road?
Harsha?
But the way to Williston Road, going south toward Williston Road.
Right.
Yeah, we call it Dead Dog Road. It's a very curvy road, and that community at the north end of it is almost entirely Black there, and they have several Black churches.
Right. I've done research in that area. It's generally called Arredondo. And it was, it was founded by African Americans, probably from the Hale and the other plantations in the area. I can remember going out and talking to a number of people when I was doing research in the area. And Karen Kirkman has done a sterling job of contacting as many of the individuals and descendants and done a great job of integrating their remembrances to those of the Hale family.
As a child, I remember going out. Okay, as a child, I remember going out to the homestead with my family, and my daddy had boarded everything up, so it was black as soot in there, and you had to have a little flashlight. And we'd go in, and of course, as kids, we'd scare each other, and the bats would be flying around in there. And I was kind of cautious about going upstairs. That didn't appeal to me too much. But I had a horse, and several of the kids along that area, we'd ride our horses out there. And up and down Archer Road, it was just a little 2-lane road with the railroad tracks. But the homestead was really fun to go into in those days. My daddy had put a tin roof on top in order to prevent it from collapsing. And that preserved it for a long time. And he would take friends out there to hunt quail and dove. And we had great New Year's Day dinners with those. And it was just a fun place to explore.
I should add that Beverly is a longtime member of the board of directors there. Have you been on it always? Okay. So there's so many family members still here in the community, but Karen Kirkman's going to talk specifically about the Civil War diaries of what's her name, Chestnut?
Not Serena.
Yeah. And this is another story, but it's in Camden, and there's a National Historic Landmark house there that's quite spectacular. That's one of the family houses, and the mistress of the house, or whatever you want to call the owner, her diaries, which were hidden under her mattress, about the Civil War period, are considered perhaps the most important primary resource for people doing research on plantation life. And so Karen is going to talk about those diaries. And I can't remember the date, but don't miss that talk.
Hi, my husband and I lived in Hale for 24 years, and it did change over time. We moved there in 95. What we loved about it, what attracted us to it, was the wooded trails, no concrete, through the woods, miles of trails. My husband loved to be able to come home from work. He was going to campus every day and not get in the car again, to get exercise and to have dinner in a restaurant in the village. But what changed over time, well, the farmer's market was another thing we loved. And you could, it's kind of a joke, you could go to the farmer's market, walk there with your bags and come home with, you know, goodies, lettuce and things. But there's also the village jeweler. You could pop in and get your credit card out too. So my husband always worried about what I'd bring home from the farmer's market. But what changed over the years is the cute little gift shops and the market where you could get a quart of milk or whatever kind of disappeared, and were filled in with financial planners and real estate. And I've never had to walk, you know, or had the desire to walk to my financial planner. I'd rather have a market that sold a quart of milk, keep me out of the car.
I did not go into the current, what was happening currently, because I only know from my observation. But of course, in time, a larger, more comprehensive shopping center was built on the main corridor. It's become so large, it has its own roundabout where there's a large Publix, some shops, some various shops and offices, even a UF Health facility. Because I think the small town center, which was such an important aspect of the planning and the forethinking of the Hale Plantation, became so successful that more people wanted to serve the Hale community. And there wasn't, the plan for the larger shopping center doesn't intrude on the Hale Plantation. And I don't know what the, you know, the current planning and future of Hale Plantation is, but I think it's a matter of economics, as it always is, what succeeds and what doesn't. But I think over the years, there've been a lot of people who've had their offices and lived in Hale Plantation who were very happy to have that opportunity to live and work in the same community. So it kind of depends on your situation.
Question here?
Yes.
Hi.
You're talking about what I wanted to say something about, which is the everyday life includes getting your food. And so, and back in the old urbanism, of course, people could go from store to store within a town and get meats and just sort of like in Europe was
Mhm.
whatever in a small, urban
Mhm.
environment that they could
Mhm.
walk to. And that, I'm involved, I live in the Duck Pond and I'm look at downtown as being a place that I want to create, have become
Mhm.
more and more of that really happening so that there are places to get your food, your
Mhm.
everyday needs in your downtown. And I think of Whole Foods, for instance, these medium size, not the big Publix or whatever, but where you're talking about, it's true, it's more luxurious type of shopping, but it's not boutique-y things. There's so much. Farmers markets are lovely too, but you need a lot of items that you don't get at a farmer's market. And so really to make these new urbanistic communities real, in my mind, more real, they need to have that everyday need that maybe one of these intermediate type of supermarkets like Whole Food or whatever could fit in there. So I think of that.
Wait,
Hi, I'm Mary. My question is a quick one. Why did they make the columns come from on the porch? The columns came from in front of the porch. That was fascinating.
So you can have a larger porch roof, which gives you more dry space on the porch. Actually, it gives you a couple of extra feet. However, the best reason I can think, when the bottom of your porch pillar rots, as it will if it's set on the porch floor, it's a lot less expensive and it's a lot easier to replace that column or just simply prop it up on the ground instead of having to do major carpentry to replace a post that, and it's something that can be added to a very simple farmhouse. If you're driving around South Carolina, you see a lot of very simple farmhouses that have this kind of porch and pillars. And if you can replace it, every 20 years or so, and it still gives your house a sense of elegance. And also it's more practical in the long run. The Matheson House in downtown Gainesville, if you've ever been to the Matheson House or noticed their pillars, they are of the same type. The pillars in front of the Matheson House are set away from the porch floor and expand the front porch was a very social space. And it also told people who approached your house who you were.
I think that that's the most interesting architectural feature, and it's very distinctive to Camden, and it came to Gainesville. And I think it's also true of the Bailey House, which is the oldest house in Gainesville on Northwest 6th Street. I think the columns do that there. But it would clearly, as I understand it, was to prevent the porch from rotting, that it was easier to replace a column than to replace the whole porch. So that's my understanding architecturally. But it is certainly a wonderful example of adaptation to the environment.
I have a question that I've seen in many films about various architectures across many different states, where the peak of the roof is over the main house, and the slope of the roof from the peak comes almost a very sharp angle down, and then halfway or at the porch level, the level of the roof declines. So it's a kind of a step function. And I know that we know about Mansonar roofs and others And I wonder if we've ever had a name associated with this kind of structure where the roof structure comes down and then, oh, back up, back one.
Okay.
There you go. So you'll see that there is a structure of the roof where the chimneys are, which is over the main house, and then over the porch. There is a significant decline in the rate of descent of the roof over the porch. And I wonder if this particular approach has a name. You know, we know about Mansonar roofs, we know about other kind of roofs, but this roof is kind of significant because it differentiates the house portion from the porch portion. And I wonder if it has a name or an associated style with it.
I don't know, and actually I don't even know if there's a name for the type of pillars that we're talking about here. It's just something that we noticed as I've been to Camden taking photographs of, you know, one house after another built in the 1800s or late 17 that have this kind of, whether it was original to the house or whether they adapted it later, I've no idea. Incidentally, this photograph is probably squinched a little bit because I always think of this as being a very broad porch. So that photograph makes it look a little too skinny, but that's photography for you.
I don't know about the roof name, but I do know that porch is referred to as a rain porch. Because it keeps, like you just said, it keeps the water.
Well, you
off.
can, yeah, you can sit on the porch or play on the porch, and even in a heavy rainstorm, unless it's blowing from the front direction, you're fairly dry. So it makes and it's such a broad overhang, it's also cooler. So you get more shade per inch than you would if the porch roof stopped right at the front porch, the edge of the front porch. Porches were incredibly, I mean, that was the air conditioning that was available to people. And it could be a small vernacular 2-room cottage. And it's still, you can, later years, people screened them. They even, would, enclose them with windows. And so you wanted the porch, but this television came along and air conditioning, and the porch just became sort of a decorative feature for the most part.
Murray, in terms of the structure, the steep pitch of the home, I would think having that lower pitch allows for a broader porch, because if it had the steep pitch of the original roof, it would be coming down at too steep an angle to allow for a very broad porch. And plus, it probably adds some kind of a contrast feature. I'm not an architect, but it seems like it brings a little bit more character to property. And like you say, it is a very functional place and provides shelter from the rain and the elements.
House is very symmetrical. Right now, the front porch leads to the double doors, which when they're open.
Laurie, get to the mic a little bit, closer to the mic.
I really didn't get into the architecture of the building, but if you go now to visit, you enter it, the front door is open, the back door is open, so the breeze goes right through the middle of the house. The windows are huge, so if you, during a hot day, you'd open all the windows and all the doors, and and the porch, again, just absorbs the blast of the hot sun, so it cools the breeze as it's going through the house. And if you go to visit the Hale house, it's not air conditioned. It was not they did not have electricity during those years that the family used it as a social space. So they would have used kerosene lanterns to light the house. There was actually a well in the back and a cistern. So it took a long time to modernize the building, probably during the restoration in the 1980s.
It seemed,
Shed roof. I call it a shed roof. You know, it's just a shed. It could be off to the side. It could be in the back. And you can, you know, as Beverly said, her father put the roof on top of the shingles. So the shingles were there when they did the restoration. When they removed the rusty tin roof, I'm sure they weren't in really great shape, but that has been restored, the original, which is not as durable as a tin roof. And right now, that's one of the projects they're facing, is replacing some of the wooden shingle areas of the wooden shingles.
right here? It seems like if the pitch of that porch had not changed, the edge of the porch would come down lower than the top of the windows, and you couldn't see much out of the front windows, and it would make the interior rooms dark.
We'll have to find out the name.
Just a very short comment about stores and everything like that, and the evolution of new urbanism and neo-traditional has been, you see an example of this in town of Tioga, where they put their commercial and their stores in the front. We lived 7 years, we were founders in Celebration, and the interior stores, and they have a hard time existing. So with the new communities being built, they're building the commercial outside to pick up business from the entire community.
That's a good point. And town of Tioga is really very different from Hale, and Jay Reeves will be talking about that next week. But as I recall, the guidelines require a front porch. The houses have to be quite close to the sidewalk. So it's very different, but they're both interesting examples of the new urbanism.
Thanks, Peg, for leading into next week's program, when Jay will return to talk about town of Tioga.
So we've run over a bit, but this was really interesting, Murray. Thank you for being here, and thank you all for being here.
Well, thank you for giving me an opportunity to continue to learn about historic buildings and their accessories, the buildings that we're still building today. Thank you.
And thank you for all you've done in our community, as I say, including the 2 National Historic Landmarks. It's very special.
Thank you, Roy. Glad you could join.